Hey everybody, DM Gallibond here for Lore Friday. And today we are going to be taking a look at the first adventure from Out of the Abyss called Escape Velkynvelve. But before we get started, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, click the post notification bell so that you know every time new content drops on the channel and every time we go live for one of our live streams. This is the first adventure in Out of the Abyss. Out of the Abyss was a campaign in the Underdark published by Wizards of the Coast on September 15th, 2015. And this particular adventure is set for level 1, tier 1 PCs. All right, the theme of this adventure here is to escape imprisonment from an Underdark drow outpost. The setting is the drow outpost of Velkynvelve, which is somewhere in the Underdark. Now, they give you a map, and I suppose if you're much more of a lore nerd than I am, you could look at this map and you could sort of figure out, looking at a separate map of the surface, you could figure out how everything lines up. Not me. It's an outpost somewhere in the Underdark. Now, the teaser for this one is the last thing you remember was being in a tunnel. Someone screamed, and there was a tiny sting on your neck. You turned, and out of the darkness came glowing lavender eyes and a shock of white hair as your eyes swam and you felt yourself falling. Now you're awake with some of your friends and several strangers imprisoned in a cell in deepest darkness, guarded by drow. There's a lot to unpack with the introduction to this particular adventure. This adventure is the beginning of a campaign, and a lot of times the campaigns will begin with a singular event that is a natural hook to draw the players into finding out more information about something that's going on. But in this case, the adventure begins with the level 1 players or the level 1 PCs already having been captured and being prisoners of the drow. So they don't even have a chance to RP, fighting against their captors. And it feels all a little bit contrived. Also, when they wake up, they find they are in a prison cell with 10 NPCs. 10 NPC prisoners. And each one of those 10 NPC prisoners has a full backstory, has a lot of individual motivations, a lot of individual goals, individual personality quirks, all these kinds of things that you have to keep track of. So if you want to play this out the way it is written, the preamble before you ever get out of the RP of setting up the scene, that could take 2 or 3 game sessions, depending on how long your game sessions are. What I would propose is you have a session pre-zero with each of your individual players. During that session pre-zero, go ahead and roll up the character, establish why you were in the Underdark, go through a scenario with them of how they were captured. You may even let them try to fight against their drow captors. But in the end, of course, there's too many drow. They're going to be overwhelmed either by the sleep poison or physically knocked unconscious, and they're going to be captured. While that is going on, I would drop the names of 1 or 2 of the drow that will show up as members of this outpost. So they were captured by people who were stationed at this outpost. And it can be different NPC or a different drow that capture each PC. So you can sprinkle a bunch of names of these drow across all of the players. Then, also during this individual session 0, go far enough to have them wake up in the prison cell at Velkynvelve. and have them interact with only one or two of the NPC prisoners. And give each PC a little bit of different information about the camp from the perspective of the NPC, and also reveal a little bit about only one or two of the NPCs to each player. So do that with all of your players. Then when you come for your session 0, you explain to them, okay, you guys have all of your characters rolled up. Introduce your characters to each other. You're all in prison together. You're here with a bunch of NPCs, and all of your stuff has been taken from you. You have no possessions except for these trinkets, and there's a list of trinkets I can roll up. You can roll up those trinkets because that can be kind of a fun thing to do with the group. Is like, oh, you got the live spider, and oh, you got an old coin, and you got this or you got that. So those kinds of things that you can roll up with the group together, and that can kind of be a way that they get to know each other's characters briefly. Then when you come back for session 1, you have the open where they are in the prison, and then each of these players that are at the table, they each know something about one or two of the NPCs, but they don't know anything about all the rest of them. And then through interacting with the other players, they can figure out the information about those other NPCs. They also can figure out who the guards are because some of them know one or two of the guards, at least by name, and recognize their faces, but they don't know all of them. So this makes it much more interactive and much more quickly gets some of these details that would otherwise take you many sessions to drag out before you could actually start the action of the adventure. All right, so that's my particular recommendation for starting this adventure. PCs are presumed to be level 1, and they're imprisoned in a drow outpost on the edge of the empire controlled by Menzo Berenzan. Their captors include 19 drow, and these drow are led by a CR8 drow priestess of Lolth and 2 CR5 drow elite warriors. There's half a dozen giant spiders, and there's also a group of quaggoths. And quaggoths are kind of like Underdark versions of Yeti that are subservient to the drow, but they're not quite slaves of the drow. So they're in a better position than the PCs are, but they still take orders from the drow. So the PCs turn out not to be the only prisoners in the outpost, but there's 10 other prisoners, all NPCs, a motley bunch that squabble with each other, and some of them play politics almost as much as the drow do. So these prisoners include several Underdark denizens, a Myconid, a Darrow, which is one of the 2 types of Underdark dwarves, several Deep Gnomes, a Quaggoth, a Drow, and a Kuatoa. And then there's 2 other surface dwellers. There's an Orc and a Shield Dwarf. So the goal of the adventure is to escape imprisonment, but the drow and their allies are so much more powerful than the PCs, it can be easy for the players to see escape as either suicidal or doomed to failure. Now, some of the things that will put a crack in this inescapable prison that the PCs find themselves in is that there's internal politics within the drow, but that can play out at a really slow pace if you don't do something to speed it up. There's some vague hints in this adventure about the terrors to come later in the campaign. Those vague hints are revealed through interactions with the other NPC prisoners. That's why I say take those interactions offline, do them during character creation with the individual players so that everybody knows a little bit of this stuff. The other reason to do that is that those quirks, those revelations, they don't have anything to do with escaping from the prison. So if you try to do that during the gameplay sessions, you're just going to feel like you're giving a bunch of misdirection, and you're just going to confuse the players about what the goal, what the story, what they're supposed to be focused on. Try to take that offline as much as you can, and then once you get them all together, just be really focus this action on, hey, you guys are in jail, you're going to be sold to drow slavers in Menzo Baranzan, you better try to get away. Have that be kind of the focus of your play sessions. The escape is only made possible when something the drow consider a threat, which is an attack by some powerful demons, when that draws the attention of the drow away from the prisoners. And even then, escape is risky because, as written, retrieving the character's gear requires them to go to the most secure part of the outpost, the personal quarters of that CR8 Drow Priestess of Lolth. You expect a level 1 party to go marching into the quarters of a CR8 monster and steal all their stuff back from her. It sounds a little bit like bad dungeon design to me, but that's the way it's written. I have an alternative idea. As a DM, this adventure poses a number of challenges. The first among those is information overload. So much information has to be dumped on the players about the setting, about the drow, about the politics of the drow, about the NPC prisoners, about what's going on with the NPC prisoners, hints about what's coming in the future of the campaign. I've already given you a way that you can offload that, take that out of the active sessions, and still give it in chunks to the players, and then force the players to actually interact with each other in order to disseminate all of that to the rest of the party. There's too many NPCs in my point of view. There's 10 NPC prisoners, all of whom could possibly survive and escape with the party. All of them have different locations they want to get to within the Underdark, and most of them are too scared to abandon everybody else. So what that means is that if you play it strictly as written, you, Mr. Ms. DM, you're going to have to deal with 10 NPC prisoners tagging along with the party, all of them squabbling with each other. And that's just going to be a distraction for the players, while you sit there and have arguments with yourself with these other NPCs. So I don't like that design. I don't like that aspect of this design. Now I'm going to tell you how I resolve the problem of what to do with all the NPCs and how to get the action moving. There is an option presented that some of the NPCs can have a fight, but it's basically a non-event because the drow guards are just supposed to sit around and watch until it gets too violent, and then they just use their sleep darts to knock everybody out, and that's the end of it. I took it a little bit of a different direction. I chose to use this as a way to let the PCs find out where their gear is. The two NPCs start a fight. The drow guards come around to watch this fight, and then a bunch of the other NPCs get drawn into it. So the drow, they're not having any of it. They just pull out their sleep darts, and they hit everybody, party included. And they keep hitting them until everybody is either succumbs to the drow poison and goes unconscious, or until they take enough damage that they go unconscious. So the guards just put an end to all of that, and everybody is out. When the PCs wake up, they are taken one at a time to be interrogated by the Drow Priestess of Lolth's new lover in front of the Drow Priestess herself. And then two other Drow leaders are there. One is another female who's kind of an apprentice to the priestess. The second is another drow elite warrior who is the former lover of the priestess. During this, there's a bunch of posturing that goes on, and they can begin to see how there's a lot of distrust and friction and everything between the drow priestess and her current lover and the other two. That sort of plays out in front of the prisoners. So because you're going to have each of the PCs questioned individually, you can play out a different aspect of that for each one of them. The other thing that happens is when they are questioned, the drow priestess has all of that character's gear laid out in front of her. So when they get there, they're like, oh crap, the priestess has our gear. Well, by the end of the questioning, one of the guards says, shall I put the gear back? And what I did is I said, the priestess says, no, this is junk. It's not worth for us hanging on to. Why don't you take it to the Quaggoth den and give it to the Quaggoths and let them have it? And the PCs by this time will realize that the Quaggoth den is right next to the prison. So one by one, they realize that all of their gear is now basically in the room next door to where they're being held prisoner. That's going to be important for when the distraction comes that allows them to get out. Then you go to the next game day, and I said that on the next game day, the drow had determined that the two PCs that caused the fight were enough of a problem that they need to make an example of them. This is going to, and the drow NPCs will talk about this in front of the prison cell. This is a stain on the priestess. It's going to be seen as a failure of hers. Again, use that drow politics against her. It's a failure of hers because she can't control these mere slaves. And that's going to be 2 less slaves that they are able to sell to the slave markets in Menzoberranzan. She is going to be out of favor with the powers that be in Menzoberranzan, which you can tell some of the other ones, some of the other drow, they're okay with that. But the idea that they're going to execute these 2 NPCs, the method of execution is going to be feeding them to the giant spiders right in front of the other prisoners. Just to really show them how bad it is to tick off your captors. But before they can actually feed the NPCs to the spiders, several powerful demons enter the same area where this outpost is, and they are involved in a fight with each other. But that fight starts causing collateral damage by, some of their abilities going wild and attacking some of the drow. So the drow realize that this demon fight is a threat to themselves. So then they all mobilize and they all move out to fight against the demons. But this jilted drow lover, he's kind of one of the ones that talks about how awful it is for, you can tell he's playing the world's smallest violin. Oh, it's just so terrible. No, it's wonderful. That the drow priestess is going to be shamed by losing these 2 prisoners. And as he gets up and runs off to the fight, he accidentally drops the key to the cell. He runs off. The prisoners then are able to get that key, and they're able to unlock the cell and get themselves out. Now, because I have moved the gear, that's off in the den with the Quaggoths. So probably most of the Quaggoths are off with the drow trying to fight the demons. This is a perfect chance to have a skills challenge. So I run a skills challenge, and the skills challenge is, can you get your gear And then can you make your way out of this outpost and escape into the Underdark without having either the demons come after you or without having the drow come after you? And then along the way, I had a number of the NPC prisoners get knocked off. Okay. In one case, there was a drow guard, and a couple of the foolish NPC prisoners who had been there longer than the PCs, they went and attacked the drow guard. And in that fight with the drow guard, all of them wind up going off of this high cliff and falling down over 100 feet to slam on the cavern floor below. So that kills one of the drow guards and kills two of the NPCs. And then I had another NPC that got eaten by a spider. So that takes care of another NPC. And I had decided, like, there were 3 of the NPCs, because of where they wanted to go and that it was an appropriate level for the party, and because of what their motivations were, I only wanted to let these 2 or 3 NPCs actually have a chance to survive and leave with the party. And if they really botched up the skills challenge, I was going to say that all 3 of those NPCs were going to get killed in the escape attempt. So it was a win-win for me because I was whittling down the number of NPCs I had to track. And if the party did really bad, they would have no one who knew anything about how to get around in the Underdark to guide them anywhere. So it was a way of sort of limiting the number of options I had to deal with, and it also allowed the session to move along, and it gave this appearance of how dangerous these demons and the spiders and the drow were, and really pushed the party just to get out of here and get away and not try to be heroic and go and try to steal things from the drow on their way out. Just get their gear and go. And it really kept the pace of that session up. So that is the way I handled it. There's going to be DMs out there who have a voice talent equal to or better than that of Matt Mercer. And those DMs really enjoy entertaining their players with all of the different funny voices and with all the different personalities and everything like that. And if that is you, then by all means, you may want to take a completely different approach. You may want to keep all of the NPCs alive and just sort of have the entire escape be sort of a farce with playing out the whole Keystone Cops or Three Stooges or whatever routine that you're going to do with these NPCs, and have it just be kind of a madcap, fun sort of adventure. Plus, if all of that crew is going along with the PCs on their adventures, then you're just going to be able to keep them entertained for the whole campaign. So, that's your talent, and that's the way you want to do it. By all means. That's not my talent. I have like 2 or 3 voices, and none of them are really good. I want to limit the number of NPCs that my party has to deal with at any one time. The most common enemies that you are going to find in this particular adventure is the drow, obviously. 19 of the drow plus other assorted allies and the NPC prisoners. Toughest potential encounter you'll have is against a drow priestess of Lolth, who's a CR8 monster, and a drow elite warrior, who's a CR5 monster. So special creatures or items that are in this particular adventure are something called a tentacle rod. There is a wand called a wand of viscous globs, and there are various cursed or mind-altered creatures. So they're creatures that use the same stat block as the standard creature, but they have different weird kind of mind alterations, which either gives them a strange personality or in some cases gives them a bit of a curse. My favorite element of all out of this adventure is the day in the life scenario you get from the setup. You get a wonderful template here of a remote drow outpost on the edge of an Underdark empire. The outpost is remarkably well detailed, all the way down to what the drow eat and the kinds of materials they use to make their furniture. It also details drow politics as practiced by both the male and the female drow. The adventure makes an excellent template if you need to create drow outposts and populate them with a hierarchy of dark elves and the other creatures and slaves that they use to do their bidding, and it drives a portion of the dark elf economy. Easiest homebrew adaptation. This adventure is suitable for anything where the PCs are interacting with the drow. Like I alluded to at the beginning, if you want to create a homebrew Underdark campaign, and you want to have the PCs already in the Underdark at the start of the campaign, you could take this template of this drow outpost and use that as the starting point. And then, maybe if you're telling a different kind of story, you have another kind of distraction that allows the PCs a chance to get away. But understanding this politics between the drow, if they are going to eventually go and have to deal with, more powerful drow as they get higher and higher level, this could be a good way of sort of showing them kind of the greed and envy and distrust and everything that goes on, not only between male and female drow, but between drow that are of different levels and are trying to gain advantage over each other for one reason or another. Using this with other editions, many of the creatures here exist in older editions of D&D, so there might be one or two that you have to swap out for something equivalent. Next week on Lore Friday, we are going to be looking at the next adventure in this series, and that is called Into Darkness. But for now, that's all we have here. Before we go, I just want to remind you again, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, click the post notification bell so that you get notified every time new content drops on the channel. I've been DM Gallibond. This has been Lore Friday. We hope we will see you back next week. Take care, everybody. Good night.